Welcome back. Andrea Jo Rodgers, author of On Heaven's Doorstep, is joining us. Thank you for being with us, Andrea Jo.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So, your book is about your experiences, long experiences. You've had many years of experience as an EMT. Tell us about that. Tell us about your vocation doing that.
Well, I was actually going into my senior year of high school when I was working at the beach in the office selling beach badges when one of the beach cops came in and asked me to volunteer with the first aid squad. And I said, no. I mean, I didn't know anything about first aid.
Yeah.
I was really busy. I was busy with school clubs and I ran track. But for every reason I gave not to join the first aid squad, he countered with a reason that I should give it a try.
Okay.
So eventually I caved in and I joined the first aid squad because I couldn't think of a good enough reason not to join to satisfy him.
I see.
And I chose the College of William and Mary because they have a very good business program. But through my volunteer work with the first aid squad, I realized that I really liked the health-related fields. So I ended up becoming a physical therapist.
Okay.
So it really changed the course of my life. And I've been answering calls ever since.
Wow, wow. And some of the stories you share in your books, this is just your latest, right, on Heaven's Doorstep. They're amazing stories. I mean, maybe you can just share a little bit about what prompted you to want to share these stories that you've experienced with the world.
Well, my hope was that people would be comforted or inspired by the stories, maybe be able to relate to something in their own lives. So some of the stories are miracles, what I would consider to be miracles. Some are sad but faith-filled, and a few are just humorous.
Right. Okay, well, you mentioned your faith. Maybe we could talk about the title, right?
Yes.
On Heaven's Doorstep. How'd you come up with the title? What was the inspiration for that?
So On Heaven's Doorstep, God's Help in Times of Crisis, True Stories from a First Responder. It's actually a sequel to my first book, At Heaven's Edge, True Stories of Faith and Rescue. And I felt like there were so many amazing things that I've witnessed in my years as a volunteer, and I really wanted to share them with other people. And I'll read you the preface of the book, and that kind of explains. So, during times of crisis, many of us turn to the Lord for help. At these moments, the volunteer EMS community is blessed to be able to serve as instruments of Jesus. In these frightening times, as we perch on heaven's doorstep, we may unexpectedly find inspiration.
Wow, that's beautiful. Because I think, when I think of EMT, and my soon-to-be son-in-law is an EMT, I think that's a scary job. I mean, I think for a lot of us, we're afraid of encountering those moments that you're describing there. How does your faith feed you in those moments?
You know, I was born a Catholic, so I've always had a strong faith, but I think that being part of these moments in people's lives have strengthened my faith.
Yeah, okay, so, but you mentioned miracles.
Yes.
Can you share a story?
Sure. There is one at the end of the book I'll share. The chapter's called The Miracle of Bethany Walker.
Okay.
So one night years ago, our squad was on a first aid call for a person with a shoulder injury. And as we were loading them into the ambulance, our pagers went off and we had another first aid call for a person who was unresponsive. So I made up the names in the book, I changed their names. So Jesse, Jose, and I left the first call to go back to the first aid building to get another ambulance to go to the second call. And we recognized the address. I live in a small town. We knew it was the Walker residence, and we had been there before. Actually, for the older Mr. Walker had fallen. So we were kind of assuming that the call would be for the elderly Mr. Walker. And on the way to the house, our pagers went off again with an update, and they said, CPR in progress. So we rushed up the front sidewalk, and the young Mr. Walker was outside, and I'll never forget the urgency in his voice. He called each of us by name, and he said, please do something.
Oh, my gosh.
So we rushed into the house, and there on the floor is the young Mrs. Walker, his wife. It wasn't the elderly Mr. Walker at all. And the police were doing CPR, and they had a defibrillator on her, and they said that they had tried to shock her, but there was no shock advised by the machine. Jesse took over the defibrillator, and I helped with CPR, and then he pressed the analyze button again. And I remember praying, like, dear Lord, please let this shock work. And he pressed the shock button. I rechecked her pulse on the side of her neck, but she still didn't have a pulse. And that went on for some time. And then after the third shock, she finally got back a pulse. But she was still completely unresponsive, and she wasn't breathing.
Oh, scary.
So the paramedics came from the hospital and they established an airway, they intubated her, and they said that her pupils were fixed and dilated, which is not a good sign. It's
right,
like poor,
right.
for poor, indicates a poor prognosis. But so we kept, working with her, breathing for her. We put her in the ambulance and we took her to the hospital. And we had heavy hearts, but we had hope. Mm-hmm. Well, about 5 days later, Jesse said, I ran into Mr. Walker, and he said that his wife is still completely unresponsive. She's on a ventilator. And in fact, one of the doctors told him to start thinking about taking her off life support.
Oh, boy.
So we were devastated. I had been praying so hard that she would be okay. Mm-hmm. And then he said, I need more time. I'm just not ready yet. So we kept praying. About 3 days later, he was visiting her in the ICU, and she woke up, and she opened her eyes, and she said, "What just happened to me?"
Oh, my gosh.
So
all that prayer support.
Yeah, we got our miracle.
Oh,
and,
that's beautiful.
Over the next 15 years, I used to see her riding her bike around town at the
it's
supermarket.
just a reminder.
A reminder. And then one day, I saw her with her family, and she pointed out her grandchild, and I thought, wow, 15 years ago, I sent up that urgent prayer to heaven.
Yeah.
And now here she is standing in front of me watching a grandson that she would have never had a chance to meet.
What a beautiful opportunity to witness
miracle,
that story.
right?
And I can feel how much you care about the people that you care for. So thank you for doing that important work.
Thank you
Again,
so much.
the book is On Heaven's Doorstep. And Andrea Jo, thank you so much for being here and joining us on The Gist and sharing from your heart about the important work you do.
Thank you so much.